The original Star Wars trilogy is a series of seemingly untouchable films that we have placed on the highest of pedestals in our minds as Star Wars fans. These movies kickstarted the Star Wars phenomenon as we know it and allowed for an entire universe to be constructed around them. Seeking to expand on his story and tell the tragic tale of the fall of Anakin Skywalker to the dark side, George Lucas set out to create the prequel trilogy. As we all know, the prequel films were each met with massive controversy surrounding them, as many glaring issues caused fan outrage over Lucas's direction and writing. That is not to say that all Star Wars fans disliked the prequels, but a large portion did and still do to this day. Back in 2012, when Disney bought the rights to Star Wars from Lucas, they immediately announced their plans to create a sequel trilogy to the original trilogy, completely wiping away the 30 years of stories that had been written about the time post-Return of the Jedi, and starting off with a new fresh slate. Fast forward some years and here we are now, 2 films deep into the new Disney Star Wars sequel trilogy. Have the new films been good so far? Well, that's up for each fan to decide for themselves. But what I want to do now is compare the separate trilogy entries movie by movie and discuss the elements between them that either make them work or fail as a Star Wars film, or simply a film in general. Starting off with Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, versus Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Now before I begin, I want to be clear that a lot of this video will sound like me nitpicking, which is of course true. We're talking about 2 fantasy movies in one of the largest fandoms in the world. It is impossible to make a comparison video between the two without a bit of nitpicking. I also want to be clear that I'm doing this as if we've only seen the first film in these 2 trilogies, as if we've only seen Episode 1, The Phantom Menace in the prequel trilogy, and as if we've only seen Episode 7 in the sequel trilogy. Now, both films are the grand entries into the new trilogies, vital films that establish the trilogy's story and characters. So how do they stack up to one another? Which film starts their respective trilogy off better? Well, that's a hard question to answer, simply because both films are very different in terms of characters, plots, and usage of Star Wars lore. Yet, some similarities can still be drawn between the two. It's easy to see that Episode 1 was definitely made with children in mind. George wanted to capture a whole new generation of fans with this film, and you can see just how lighthearted and uplifting the film can be at times. Needless to say, George succeeded in this, as he did capture millions of new Star Wars fans with Episode 1, at the cost of many of the older fans not liking his choices within the film. This is in comparison to Episode 7, which, on the other hand, wasn't geared as heavily towards children as it was towards a genuine sense of recapturing the nostalgia all former fans have for the original trilogy. The way I want to go about this is by going through several different categories. First, I want to take a look at the characters in both films. What are their motivations? How are they established and developed? And how was the actor's performance as the character? Next, I want to take a look at the plotline. Does it make any sense, and is it interesting at all? Lastly, I want to take a look at the music. With John Williams doing the scores for both films, you would expect there to be a lot of similarities. But, in all honesty, the way he carries the emotion in both films is actually very different. So let's get started, shall we? First off, let's get into characters. Which film had the better characters overall? Well, let's take a look at what we got. We have the main characters in Anakin and Rey. We have the mentor characters in that of Qui-Gon and Han. The supporting characters in that of Obi-Wan, Padme, Finn, and Poe. The villains, Palpatine, Darth Maul, Snoke, Kylo, and Phasma. And the comedic relief in Jar Jar and BB-8. So let's start off with Anakin and Rey. Both characters are somewhat stuck on a desert planet, which they don't like being on. Both have a strong connection to the Force, but really don't know it yet. And they both get discovered by a mentor figure who wants to help guide them into their full potential. Their motivations are very different. Anakin is a slave who wants to be free. He wants his mother to be free, and if possible, he wants all the slaves to be free, because obviously slavery is cruel and wrong. Meanwhile, Rey is a scavenger stuck on Jakku. She's essentially waiting there for her parents to return. She doesn't know who they are or where they went, but she's content to just wait there forever for them to come back. In fact, throughout a good portion of the rest of the movie, she wants to go back, just so she can simply go back to being a junk scavenger, waiting for her parents. It's a touching motivation, but it's not as emotional as Anakin's. When Anakin makes that decision to leave Tatooine and go on to become a Jedi, it's because he knows it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a chance to be free, to become the one thing he's always dreamed of. But he still has a hard time doing it because he knows he's abandoning his mother. He misses her, but knows he can't go back because he's destined for greater things. With Rey, she really has no goal of what she wants to do when she gets off Jakku, besides just going back. It's only at the end of the movie that she decides to go on to find Luke and train to become a Jedi herself. One of the biggest similarities between Anakin and Rey is that they are both Mary Sues, or I guess in Anakin's case, a Gary Stu. Mary Sue and Gary Stu, of course, meaning that the characters are able to overcome really any obstacles before them, easily. This is of course due to their connection to the Force, but this is also where they start to differ a lot too. A good way to show this would be by comparing how it is revealed that they have a connection to the Force. Anakin's connection to the Force can be seen very subtly. It's something that Qui-Gon takes note of. Qui-Gon can see that Anakin has quick reflexes, almost as if he can see things before they actually happen. This is what allows him to be a pod racer, when most humans aren't usually pod racers because they don't have as good of reflexes as other aliens. This is a sharp contrast to how it is revealed to us that Rey has a connection to the Force, and that she can use it to do almost anything. She can pilot the Millennium Falcon, resist Kylo's attempts to infiltrate her mind, and then reverse it on him and infiltrate his mind trick others, and use the Force to pull a lightsaber to her from yards away. On top of this, she also has the ability to defeat a trained and tested Dark Jedi in battle. Now, I know a lot of you may be quick to jump on the fact that Anakin was able to pilot a Naboo starfighter too without any prior knowledge of how to pilot one. But if you remember, it took off on autopilot like he says. And also he's got R2 with him, helping him pilot it. Yes, it's dumb that the situation even occurs, but it is explainable. Unlike Rey's natural ability to fly a ship even though she's never piloted a ship before in her entire life, and has no droid to help her out. Rey's very character breaks the entire mythos of Star Wars, in how she is able to so quickly learn and perform Force abilities that in the past had required extensive training to perform. It's like J.J. Abrams had only been told what the Force is and never actually got around to actually understanding how Lucas had set up how it works. The worst insult to all of this is when Rey defeats Kylo in a lightsaber fight. Here's a person who has never held a lightsaber before in her entire life, now going toe-to-toe with the very guy who wiped out all of Luke's new Jedi Order, and beating him. Now, a very common excuse that I often hear is that Kylo was shot by Chewbacca's bowcaster, and that means he's wounded throughout the fight with Rey. But that doesn't really work for me, because if he's able to defeat Finn so easily while being so wounded, then why can't he also defeat Rey easily as well? Now, I know that when Disney wiped out all of the EU, they also wiped out the fact that there were 7 forms of lightsaber combat. But even without those forms being canon, we should all at least be able to understand that Kylo should be a very well-trained and deadly warrior. There's no way that someone so untrained should have ever been able to defeat him, not even with the Force on her side. It just breaks all prior Star Wars logic that Lucas had set up about the Force. It would be like if Luke had defeated Vader in the end of The Empire Strikes Back, or if Anakin had fought and killed Darth Maul in a lightsaber duel at the end of Episode 1. It would just ruin the entire arc of the character, and also defy all previous logic that Lucas had set up. Now, what does Rey have left to overcome? Snoke? Finding out who her parents are? It's all just massive wasted potential. Lucas really isn't excused from this either though, as he also introduced a concept that defied all previous logic he had established in the original trilogy, in his idea of midichlorians. But midichlorians really don't break anything either. They're just an unnecessary answer to a question we never really asked. Take away midichlorians and you still have the exact same events transpiring. Basically, they don't really matter. They're just a dumb explanation to why people can use the Force. Sure, they break some of the mystery that we had before, but it doesn't really matter because midichlorians don't really matter. The Force still works the same way, with or without us knowing about midichlorians. So when it comes down to it, Anakin and Rey both have their flaws, but in Anakin's case, I'm willing to give him an edge. He just has a way more compelling story and is easier to relate to. You want to root for him, because he deserves it. Unlike Rey, we are never quite convinced she ever even wanted to be there. Now in terms of acting, I consider to be a wash. Jake Lloyd was a pretty good child actor for the time, but I feel he was given some pretty bad dialogue to work with in spots. While with Rey, Daisy Ridley isn't really an amazing actress, yet she isn't a bad actress either. She's just so-so. Her delivery of the lines were well enough, and goes through the motions in a convincing way. My biggest complaint about her is that she feels stale in the role after just a little while. She often has the same reaction to things, making the same faces and gestures, and it honestly just starts to feel a little hokey after a bit. Next, let's take a look at the two mentor figures, in the forms of Qui-Gon Jinn and Han Solo, both portrayed by brilliant actors Liam Neeson and Harrison Ford. Both characters feel motivated to help out Anakin and Rey because they see the potential within them. Qui-Gon because he believes Anakin to be the chosen one, while Han feels Rey is a headstrong, quick learner who knows her way around a ship. Both characters play a good role in the film and are portrayed well by their actors. So for the mentor role, I love both Qui-Gon and Han. I don't really consider one to be better than the other. Now let's get into a bit of a threesome here. Darth Maul, Kylo Ren, and Captain Phasma. Each of these three characters was made to look like a big badass prior to the films coming out, yet all three had so much wasted potential. All three of them were shown to have great authority, if not great skill in combat, yet all three were defeated in their first ever film appearance. Out of these three, I consider Phasma to be easily the worst. She's just worthless. Gets all hyped up before the film comes out, and then just gets like 2 scenes before she gets thrown down a garbage chute, without a fight. Had she been given a stronger role throughout the film, it would go far to not only benefit her own character, but probably Finn's as well, but we'll get into Finn a little later. Kylo at least has some good and interesting character development. He's a very conflicted character who has a lot of power behind him, and that goes far to open the door for a lot of interesting story potential later down the road. However, I do have some problems with Kylo Ren. Number 1, he reveals his face at the wrong time. It would have been a much more dramatic scene if we were to first see his face when he confronts his father Han, not earlier when he confronts Rey. There's no payoff then when he reveals his face to Han, and it lessens the drama of the father and son reunion. The second problem is of course him getting defeated by Rey, which also ruins Kylo's arc just as much as it ruins Rey's. Finally we have Maul. Darth Maul gets absolutely no character development in The Phantom Menace, yet he still works for the most part. He's Sidious's apprentice, a Dark Lord of the Sith, and we are shown just how deadly he is when he gives Qui-Gon a run for his money during their brief fight on Tatooine, and then goes on to take on both Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan on Naboo at the same time, pretty much mopping the floor with both of them. His defeat, however, ruins any future potential for another strong villain throughout the prequels. Had he survived somehow, which I know he does because of the Clone Wars TV show, but I'm strictly talking about the movies right now, his survival could have made for a far more emotional villain. Just imagine if we were to have him take the place of either Count Dooku or General Grievous in the following movies. This would make his duels with Obi-Wan far more thrilling, as the two would have had a history with each other. Maul trying to get revenge for his defeat at the hand of Obi-Wan, while Obi-Wan trying to avenge his fallen master, Qui-Gon. I feel Lucas really dropped the ball on this one, and it sucks because we have to rely on a kid's show to bring the character back and give him the time he deserves. Next, let's take a look at Palpatine and Snoke. Both are portrayed by brilliant actors, with Palpatine being portrayed by Ian McDiarmid and Snoke by Andy Serkis. Both characters are working from the shadows, ensuring their master plans come to fruition. However, we get much more screen time with Palpatine than we do with Snoke. We see Palpatine initiating his master plan to become Supreme Chancellor through his use of sly politics and his persuasive and cunning nature. Meanwhile, Snoke just kinda seems like a villain for villain's sake. Now that doesn't mean Snoke is a bad character. It just means we haven't seen enough of him or know enough about him yet to actually feel anything about him other than that he is simply a powerful bad guy who converted Kylo Ren to the dark side. This means there probably is a lot of juicy story that we would want to see later down the road, yet it's not really revealed to us here yet, which isn't a problem, but it doesn't give us a lot to go off of, like how we get with Palpatine. The last two characters I want to match up are Jar Jar Binks and BB-8. Both characters are the comic relief of the films, and they also have an important role within the story, yet it's easy to see which character was the better comic relief, and that's BB-8. While the humor from Jar Jar just comes across as really annoying, the humor from BB-8 comes across as just cute. Not saying cute humor will always work, but it did the job much better than Jar Jar did. And it's sad because, just think, if Jar Jar was a bit more toned down, his character would actually work just fine. It's because Jar Jar's character was actually important. He's the one who helps Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan get to Theed so that they can rescue Padme. And he's also the one who can reach out to the Gungans for military support in the end. While BB-8 is simply serving the same purpose that R2-D2 did in A New Hope, essentially a rehash. Now for the characters that really don't have a good matchup. These are of course Obi-Wan Kenobi, Padme, Poe, and Finn. So let's start out with Obi-Wan. Does he work? Yes, although he's kinda just a cardboard cutout in episode 1. He doesn't really do so much, but be present in situations and of course defeat Darth Maul. The one thing he does do is try to check his master Qui-Gon, telling him to stop butting heads with the Council and to just follow their orders. That's about as far as he goes though in terms of doing things. He works, just because he doesn't do so much that he doesn't work. Same goes for Padme. Sure, that whole bodyguard double thing is kinda dumb. It's not too terrible though because it doesn't really break the story in any way, it's just dumb. As for Natalie Portman's acting, however, it's pretty bad. It's as if she just read the script like 5 minutes before shooting and she was reciting the words from memory and not actually trying to be the character. Now let's talk about Poe. Poe is an odd duck. He works too, but he also has an issue. We all know he's a hotshot hero pilot of the Resistance, and we actually get to see him in action firsthand. The only thing about Poe that is an issue is his disappearance. We all know that he was actually supposed to be killed off in the crash on Jakku, but then Oscar Isaac managed to convince J.J. Abrams to keep him alive. But was that really the best choice? We don't really get an explanation at all about how he survived the crash and got off Jakku. He just sort of does, which is kinda stupid. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of things in Star Wars I do like better left unknown, but it's just kinda off when it's something as important as the life and death of a major character. Yet even though it's not enough to make me say Poe doesn't work, I think he does, and continues to do so. Finn, however, is a big mess. It's a cool idea to have a stormtrooper decide to break away from the First Order and join the opposite side, but the way in which J.J. Abrams decided to show it all happen is just dumb. We go from Finn literally freaking out about the murder of civilians and the death of his friend, to him just taking out stormtroopers, his former comrades, like it's nothing, and honestly something he's kinda gung-ho for. He then goes on to suffer from roughly the same issue that Rey has, where he defeats his main antagonist, Phasma, in the first film of this new trilogy. The best way to help fix this story is the common idea that Finn probably should have fought Phasma at Maz's castle instead of some other random stormtrooper that they ended up having to create a new backstory for just because he was so misplaced for the scene. This would of course also help give Phasma's character some more weight. Imagine if she would have beat Finn here, and then he would have had to train and be better for the next encounter. It would have made the next fight between the two so much more emotional and thrilling to watch. So, in my opinion, no, Finn really doesn't work. The idea of him works, the execution of him does not. So, in terms of characters, overall I give the edge to Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. The characters in The Phantom Menace are just way better thought out than the characters in The Force Awakens. Even with Jar Jar dragging things down a lot, he doesn't break the plot or shatter any previous Star Wars logic and lore like Rey does. He simply is just annoying. That's not to say all characters in The Force Awakens are bad, as by the end of the film, you can see that Kylo Ren and Snoke have a lot of great future story potential if they're done right. Now that we've looked at characters, let's turn ourselves to each film's plotline. Both movies have a genuine goal they're trying to reach when telling their stories. Episode 1 is the first step on the road to revealing the tragic fall of Anakin Skywalker, while Episode 7 is the first step in the re-emergence and destruction of the Empire-like First Order. The original trilogy set up the Star Wars universe, establishing many of its details and leaving much for the expanded universe to, well, expand upon. When Lucas set out to make the prequels, one of the primary things he was setting out to do was to reinforce these expanded details and help the lore of the Star Wars story grow and flourish, filling in many gaps that we as viewers of the original trilogy would have been picturing in our heads for years. Things like, what did the Jedi Order look like? What did the Clone Wars really look like? Who was Luke and Leia's mother? Who was Anakin Skywalker before he became Darth Vader? All these questions and more were set to be answered. We knew where the story was going to eventually go, but how we got there was the grand age-old question. In The Force Awakens, we had no idea where anything was going to go, and there's a genuine sense of wonder to that. Even if you hated Disney for wiping away the expanded universe and all of its stories, there was still a genuine excitement for new Star Wars films and where they would be taking us. I remember being extremely angry at the destruction of the old EU, but still telling myself that if The Force Awakens turns out to be great, then I really shouldn't care too much, because at least the new story was good. However, as any new story goes, there are a couple of rules you want to follow in creating a new narrative in an already established universe. Number one is that you want to respect the lore that the universe is already established, something that Episode 7 simply throws straight out the window. And number two, you don't want to create a new story that begs so many questions that you eventually have to turn off your brain because there are so many questions that are not getting answered at all. Sure, some big questions are okay to reveal later at a much more dramatic date. For example, Snoke's identity, Rey's parents, and how Kylo fell to the dark side. But other things like the establishment of the First Order and the fall of the New Republic and Luke's new Jedi Order is something that we really should be told about by the end of the first film, as it helps us understand how we got to this point in the galaxy and prepares us for the story to come. This is a galaxy that we have spent 6 other films in. We deserve to know why it is in the state it's currently in, an answer that should be given to us at least some point in the first film in the new trilogy. Episode 1 has no establishment question issues, as we already know that we are in the age of the Old Republic, and that the Republic is essentially the galactic governing force that we already expect it to be. We don't need to find out where the Trade Federation came from, because it's a completely plausible concept that in the Star Wars galaxy there is a federation centered around the regulation of trade that exists outside of the Republic. The establishment of what is to come in both trilogies is a fine point to compare, and there's no better place to look than the 2 opening crawls in both movies. The opening crawl in The Phantom Menace is pretty boring to say the least. It talks about trading, shipping, and a debating Republic Congress. Not much there to really pump the audience up. Yet at least it sets up what is to come without causing us to scratch our heads thinking too deeply on how we got here. Because honestly, we probably couldn't care less about why the Senate is debating things and why the Federation is blocking shipments to a world. The opening crawl to The Force Awakens is the complete opposite. It immediately grips the audience, talking about how Luke went missing and how a new dangerous force has arisen from the ashes of the Empire, forcing the New Republic to create a resistance against it. But when we take off those, oh shit, we are about to be in for a lot of action and nostalgia goggles, we can see how the opening crawl essentially poses some immediate questions that we would like to know the answers to, as they undermine the whole purpose of the original trilogy. Those questions, of course, being, how did the First Order rise out of the ashes of the Empire? Why is the Republic simply sponsoring a resistance to fight the First Order and not fighting them themselves with an expectably powerful New Republic military? And what happened to Luke and the Jedi Order he was supposed to reestablish? Now, posing these kinds of questions isn't really wrong, because you expect them to eventually elaborate on how we got to this point in the galaxy. But when they never do, that's the issue. The difference is, when you're starting off from scratch in a fresh point where there are no movies predating the plot to come, you're allowed to drop the characters in whatever mess you dream up. That's completely fine to do because everything is new and there is no history to go off of. When you just spent the last 6 movies discussing the rise and fall of the Jedi and the Republic, we as fans deserve to know the answer as to how we all got to this point in the 30 years since the last film, Return of the Jedi. And I don't care that it might all be explained in a book somewhere. That's no excuse to leave it out of the film, because the movie will always be the primary source in a film series, not the books. Star Wars books should be about expanding the source material, not filling the gaps left behind by lazy screenwriters and directors. The blame for this kind of shoddy writing can be put squarely on the fact that J.J. Abrams doesn't really know Star Wars all that well. Sure, he is most likely without a doubt seen all the Star Wars movies at least once, but that doesn't mean he understands the universe. As J.J. Abrams said a million times, he set out to recapture the nostalgia and feel of the original trilogy. However, what he means by that is that he wanted to reset the story to a point that's very similar to that of the original trilogy, and make a movie that almost mirrors that of A New Hope, so that we can all feel what we felt when we first watched Star Wars. We get another Empire and another Rebellion, another droid with a piece of secret information, another hero waiting to be found on a desert world for their time to shine, another planet-destroying superweapon. It's all very similar on purpose, but just different enough that you can call it a new story. Say what you want about The Phantom Menace, but at least George Lucas gave us a lot of new and unique things in it. A setting completely different from that of the original trilogy. wildly interesting new locations to feast our eyes upon. A story unlike the ones told before. The Force Awakens didn't give us any of these things. We have a lot of very similar concepts to A New Hope, along with no new interesting locations, and like I just said, not even really a new story. Many people may call this paying homage to Episode 4, or simply a soft reboot. I call it lazy. Episode 1 gave us the story about the discovery of Anakin Skywalker, who is believed to be a prodigy of the Force. He is found during a time of great crisis in the Republic, as the conflict on Naboo has shaken the very core of the Senate and caused a change in the leadership over the whole of the Republic, all furthering Palpatine's plot to take control. It's definitely not a soft reboot or a story done too safe. It's a whole new experience that takes us to new worlds and introduces us to new concepts, all while keeping the overall feeling that we are still in the Star Wars universe. And it's for this reason that I feel the plotline and story of Episode 1 The Phantom Menace is superior to that of the story and plotline of Episode 7 The Force Awakens. The last thing between the two films that I wish to compare would be the music for each film. Music is a vital part of each Star Wars movie, an important ingredient that cannot be forgotten. Luckily, we've had John Williams' brilliant scores to back up and inspire the emotion and passion for each scene throughout the entire Star Wars saga. However, it is clear to see which film he has put more effort into between Episode 1 and Episode 7, that being Episode 1, because most of the music in Episode 7 is pretty forgettable. Aside from the main First Order theme and Rey's theme, the music in The Force Awakens is nothing to really re-listen to. In fact, if you just compare the music in similar scenes between the two films, you can really see the difference in quality. So, in a perfect world, I'd be playing some music for you now, so you could hear the difference between the two soundtracks. Unfortunately, when I tried to do this, I got hit with a lot of copyright claims. So, instead of doing that and trying to dispute it and going through all that mess, I'm just going to talk about it, and you can go on your own and listen to them. The first music comparison I want to make is the music that plays during Qui-Gon's death and the music that plays during Han's death. The music in Episode 7 just sits there playing out, while the music in Episode 1 reacts much more to the emotion of the scene. Another great comparison comes during both films' lightsaber duels. Now, tonally, I know both duels are very different, but it's easy to see which music is far more memorable. Obviously, Duel of the Fates. Overall, the music in Episode 7 just is more messy. It's as if John Williams threw a bunch of things together and said, yeah, this sounds Star Wars-y enough, and shipped it to JJ, and said, put it where you want it. It just sounds like, overall, John Williams was much more interested in doing the music for Episode 1 than he was for Episode 7. As each piece in Episode 1 stands out in its own way, while each theme in Episode 7 is just more background sound. Now, that's not saying that the entire soundtrack to Episode 7 is bad, but it's just easy to see that it doesn't stack up to that of the soundtrack to Episode 1. Since music is one of the most important features in a Star Wars film, helping carry the emotion and tension of each scene, you expect it to be more than just background noise. So that's why I give the edge to Episode 1 The Phantom Menace in terms of music. The music's just better. I don't know if that's a thing with maybe John Williams preferred working with George Lucas over J.J. Abrams, but whatever it is, it's sad to see a Star Wars film not have that good of a soundtrack. So, in conclusion, to all these comparisons, with The Phantom Menace we have a film that followed George's Star Wars mold and expanded upon the ideas he presented to us in the original trilogy, all while giving us a story that is new and competently written, and is unlike anything we had seen before. It's a film that introduces us to some new interesting characters, along with some stupid characters, and also reconnecting us to younger versions of characters we already know and love. The film took us to new places such as Naboo, with its rich surface world, and elegant undersea cities, and Coruscant, with its Senate chambers and Jedi temple, all while being accompanied by an amazing score that is truly unlike any Star Wars score we've heard before. The Force Awakens breaks away from George's Star Wars mold in a way that lets you know that the writers and directors never really knew what Star Wars was in the first place. It has all the elements of a Star Wars film, but none of the correct execution, giving us a story that's very similar to one we already got in A New Hope. Its characters are an odd mess too. Some are fine, while others are written to be completely ridiculous. The film also doesn't take us to anywhere interesting, in that we simply get rip-offs of previously seen locations with a new coat of paint. And of course, the music is severely lacking. Does that mean Episode 1 The Phantom Menace is the better film? In my opinion, yes. The Phantom Menace is a superior entry into the new trilogy. But everyone has the right to love whatever they want to love. So if you like Episode 7 more than Episode 1, that's good for you. You have the freedom to do so. Maybe you have more nostalgia surrounding it. Maybe you feel peer pressure to dislike the prequels so you don't get called names by your friends. Whatever it is, just know that Episode 7 is not anywhere near as creative or competently written as The Phantom Menace. At all.